أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. So inshallah we'll continue the series on the life and works of Imam Shafi. Today will be the third part. So we will be discussing Imam Shafi's knowledge and its sources, and this is mostly taken from Muhammad Abuzzara's outstanding work. It's like there are actually two chapters that we will be covering. So he mentioned that it is worth studying independently the stages of his academic development and his journeys. We know that his times and major events influenced him greatly, as they do every great scholar. His teachers and students agreed that he was a peerless paragon among the scholars of his time, but both the protagonist and the antagonist can be biased. So, the greater testimony of his position among the top scholars of Islam is the legacy he left behind. As I mentioned earlier when we were discussing Imam Malik as well as Imam Abu Hanifa, that you look at a scholar in terms of his lineage and his legacy. The lineage is what he belongs to, and the legacy is the work and the students he has left behind. Institutions are known by the products, their products, and those products are the research that comes out of those institutions and the students who go on to make even greater institutions. So, the greater testimony of Imam Ash Shafai's position among the top scholars of Islam, not just of his time but of all the time, is the legacy he left behind, which includes the statements transmitted from him, his fatawas, his treatises, his books, his arguments, and debates. So we'll just look at some of the testimonies of the scholars. One of them was Muhammad bin Abdul Hakam, who was one of his students in Misr. He said that Lola Shafai ma araftu kafa aruddu ala ahadin wa bihi araftu ma araftu wa huwa alladhi allamani al-qiyas. That if it was not for Imam Shafi, I would not know how to answer anyone. Whatever I learned from him. And he was the one who taught me the art of analogical reasoning. He was the person of Sunnah, and Asr means the transmissions of the Sahaba, so reports coming from Sahaba. Wa fadl wa khair. He has virtue, he has everything good. Ma'alisani fasih tawil. His language was eloquent, his language was very extensive, and his aql, his intellect was sahih rasin. His aql was correct and it was far reaching. And Imam Ibn Hanbal has narrated a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as you would recall that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the fourth leading scholar in our series, was actually one of the students of Imam Shafi. So he narrates a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a very well-known hadith that Inna Allah azza wa jal yab'asu li hadhihi al-umma ala rasi kulli mi'atin sanatin rajulan yuqimu laha amru diniha فكان عمر بن عبد العزيز على رأس المئة وأرجو أن يكون الشافعي على رأس المئة الأخرى. That the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that at the end of every century, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send a person in my ummah who will establish or who will re-establish its standing, that standing of his deen. And then Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahmahullah mentioned that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was the person of the first century, at the end of the first century. And I hope that Imam Shafi will be that person, the revivalist of the end of the second century. Now, Dawood bin Ali al-Zahiri was actually the founder of the Zahiri Madhab, and inshallah we'll discuss him as well after we have completed the series of the current series that I'm planning, inshallah. That Imam Shafi had certain fadail, certain virtues, which were not gathered in anyone else. And these include the honor of his nasab, his lineage. We have studied that of the four leading imam of these four madahib, Imam Shafi was the only one who shared the lineage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَصِحَّةَ دِينِهِ وَمُعْتَقَدِهِ, the correctness of his religion and his beliefs. وَسَخَاوَةَ نَفْسِهِ, the charity of his self. He was very gracious, very charitable. ومعرفته بصحة الحديث, and his knowledge of the authenticity of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ was saqimeh, and the weak hadith. So Imam Shafi was given the ability by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to discriminate between the hadiths that were correct, that were authentic, and those that were not authentic. وَنَاسِخِهِ وَمَنْسُخِهِ, and what were abrogating and what were the abrogated ones. وَحِبْزُ الْكِتَابِ وَالسُّنَّةِ, and memorization of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَسِيرَةَ الْخُلَفَاءِ, and the biography of the Khulafa Rashidin. وَحُسْنُ التَّصْنِيف, and the ability to write in a beautiful way. His writing was also beautiful. One of the students of Imam Shafi mentioned while listening to the tafsir of Imam Shafi, and this is something that is not very well discussed. Imam Shafi, like other Imams, was not the Imam of jurisprudence only. He was an expert in multiple Islamic sciences, but he excelled so much in Islamic jurisprudence that his control over the other sciences is not always discussed. And one of them was the ability to do the tafsir of the Quran. So one of his students mentioned, Kana Shafai ida akhadha fi tafsir ka'annahu shahidu tanzil. When Imam Shafi started to teach tafsir, it would be as if he was himself witnessing the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was so deep into it. One of the statements of Imam Shafi, and I'm quoting it by titling it as living by his words. Now, people speak the word but do not practice their words in their own character. Imam Shafi lived by his own words. He believed and he lived by his belief. So he said, Man ta'allama al-Qur'ana azumat qimatuhu. Whoever learns the Quran has immense value. وَمَنْ كَتَبَ الْحَدِيث قَوِيَتْ حُجَّتُهُ. Whoever cites hadith strengthens his proof. So when we are discussing certain things, if we support our opinion on the basis of the Quran and the Hadith, this is a stronger proof. وَمَنْ نَذَرَ فِي الْفِقْهِ نَبُلَ قَدْرُهُ. Whoever studies fiqh has noble stature. وَمَنْ نَذَرَ فِي اللُّغَةِ رَقَّ طَبْعَهُ. Whoever goes deep into the study of language, his nature is refined. وَمَنْ نَذَرَ فِي الْحِسَابِ جَزَلَ رَأْيَهُ. Whoever considers the reckoning has sound opinion. The hisab here is to think about the day of hisab, the final accountability with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسُنْ نَفْسَهُ لَمْ يَنْفَعُ إِلْمُهُ. And whoever does not protect himself does not benefit from his knowledge. Words to memorize, words to live by. So what was Imam Shafi's daily schedule? He will start his day with the Fajr prayers. Obviously, he would pray Tahajjud at home. But in his daily life, the day will start with the Fajr prayers. Then he will have the Quran circle. And if you go to Makkah and Medina, you will find that there are many circles after almost every prayer, starting from the Fajr prayer. So he had a Quran circle. There will be students of the Quran who will come attend his classes. Then they will disperse. Another group of students will come who will be studying Hadith after the sunrise. Then there will be a circle of debate and analysis when the sun rose higher. And then there will be a language study as well, in which Arabic, poetry, prose, and grammar would be studied. So the study of the Islamic studies actually include all of these things. Then I'm more familiar with the Dars Nizami, which is the 8 year syllabus of or curriculum of Islamic studies, which is taught in India and Pakistan, and the vast majority of Hanafi Madaris in the Western world as well. There is a lot of emphasis on these four aspects. There is a lot of emphasis early on in learning the Arabic language, poetry, including the Saba Muallaqat, Diwan Mutanabbi, and Diwan Hamasa, and other classical pieces of Arabic poetry, as well as Arabic prose and Arabic grammar. A lot of emphasis on Nahv and Sarf. And then the Quran studies, starting with the memorization of the Quran, the learning the meaning of the words of the Quran, moving on to the tafsir of the Quran, the Hadith studies, starting with Riyadus Salihin and uh, Mishkatul Masabi. And then it's in the final year of the studies, the 8th year, where they study 9 books of Hadith, including the Sahih Sitta. In between, they do a study philosophy, logic, debate, so forth. How did Imam Ashafi obtain excellence in knowledge? Learning a subject is one thing, is actually the beginning, but achieving excellence in any field requires certain qualities. So there are four elements of excellence in knowledge, according to Muhammad Abuzzara, and I want you to reflect upon them. And he connects it with Imam Shafi. So the four elements, he mentions it in Arabic. I will try to summarize into English. The first mention that he mentioned, that which is the pillar, and all the other elements will depend upon that, which is the mawahibu shaks wa is'adatuhu wa nuzu'ihi. These are the gifts given to a person, personal gifts. These gifts come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now it's ilm wahabi. It's a gifted knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah chooses somebody to give that person the qualities, the personality, the talent through which he can gradually go through and his studies and reach the point of excellence. The second will come from the direction of the teachers, who will shape your path. They will outline your path. وَيَخُطُّونَ فِي نَفْسِ الْخُطُوطَ الَّتِي تَتَّبِعُ فِيهَا وَلَا تَمْهِ. And this actually also relates very strongly to the teachers, that when they are teaching, especially at the primary level, the basic level, they should learn to recognize the specific talents which each student has. Not all students are created equally. Their talents may differ. Their personalities will become different as time goes by. A smart teacher with a lot of experience will be able to find one quality in each student which will prove to be his strength. And they should try to kind of chart out the path that that student will be excellent at. The next is the hayatuhu wa ikhtibaratuhu wa tajaribuhu wa darasatuhu shakhsiya. Person's own life. Everyone has his own life story. The, a child's life is not just limited to the school. He will go out back to his home where he lives with his parents. Intermingles with his cousins, his neighbors, grandparents, uncles, aunts. They all have an impact upon him. The area that he lives in, the occupation of the parents, they all have an influence. A person's own uh, ex- uh, experiments, his own experiences, whatever he achieves, whatever he learns from looking at the surroundings, is personal lessons, personal learning, a personal effort outside of the course of studies. They also have a great impact. The fourth is al asrul ladhi azillahu, his time that shadows him. So these are very important points to learn, to memorize, and see, to analyze our own life in the light of these elements. What has impacted us the most? First is, again, I will go, the God gifted talent. Second is the teachers. Third is our own life experiences, our own studies. We don't study as much. And then the times in which we live. The time has an very, very important aspect, a very important influence on us. The thought process of that time. Every period comes with its own challenges. Every period requires a specific thinking, a change in the direction. Every period has scholars, ideologists, political activists, dynamists, social scientists. They all shape the direction of that particular period of time for every individual living in that area, unless that individual just doesn't pay any attention to that. And he said, فَقَدْ أَثَرَتْ جَمِيعُهَا فِي تَكْوِينِ الشَّافِعِ. All of these four elements had a great influence in shaping who Imam Shafi became. So he wants to discuss all of them, and I will try to summarize. There are two big chapters. They are in. You can find this book in Arabic, and the one volume actually is a compilation of the four volumes on each Imam. Abu Zahra wrote the life stories of several Islamic scholars, including the four founders of the four madhabs that we have. He wrote about Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq. These books are in Arabic. The book that I'm using is an English translation of the four volumes dedicated to Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafai, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And I will caution, this is not a complete translation. The book that I have is 650 pages, four volumes. But when I looked at the Arabic volume, I have the PDF of the Arabic volume on Imam Shafi. It itself is more than 450 pages. So there is material in it which has not been translated. So the gifts which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to Imam Ashafi include, I'm just enumerating them: strong mental powers and faculties. He was a very quick witted person. You might remember his dialogue with Harun al Rashid, which actually saved his life. The ability to explain and express himself, eloquence of knowledge, very impressive voice, ability to judge a person's character and recognize the state of his mind. This quality in Arabic language is called firasa. And there is a beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, "Ittaqu firasat al-mu'min wa huwa yanzuru bi nurillah." Beware or fear the firasat of a mu'min, because he looks at things and people through the nur which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him. His circle of students grew from 6 companions initially to a large number in about 50 circles. And the purity of heart. We all need this. His sincerity and his steadfastness. He announced his opinions publicly, even if these were against what was generally held, and even if it meant opposing his own teachers. He has a very beautiful piece of poetry. Actually, today I gave a khutbah about some of the verses of Imam Shafi and explained them on the basis of the Quran and Hadith. So I'm just mentioning it to you that his opinions about Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu did not go well with the two different camps. But he was very steadfast and he was very sincere. So he says, إِذَا نَحْنُ فَضَّلْنَا عَلِيًّا فَإِنَّنَا رَوَافِدُ بِالتَّفْضِيلِ عِنْدَ ذَوِي الجَّهْلِ. That if we describe the superiority of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu or his qualities, then people who have no knowledge, who are ignorant people, they claim that we are Rawafid, that we means I. Now, what is Rawafid or Rafidi? Rawafid is the plural of Rafidi, and Rafidi was a group of Shia who preferred, who just not only preferred Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu over Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, but who cursed them. Not every Shia does it. وَفَضْلُ أَبِي بَكْرٍ إِذَا مَا ذَكَرْتُهُ. And when I describe the good qualities of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, رُمِيتُ بِالنَّسْبِ عِنْدَ ذِكْرِ لِلْفَضْل. Then the people who uh, are more leaning towards Abu Bakr, then they call that I'm Nasabis. So Nasabites were the opposite of Rawafid. Imam Ashafi was in the middle path. He recognized the fadl of Abu Bakr and Omar and Uthman and other Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim ajmain, and he was very vocal about it. At the same time, he did not downgrade Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The good qualities that Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu had, he mentioned them as well. But if he said something that would give people impression that he is favoring Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was accused of being a Rafidi. And when he described the fadl of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was accused of being a Nasabi. And a Nasabi here, it means that people who exaggerate the virtues of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu and downgrade Ma'azallah Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So he said, Fala ziltu da rafadin wa nasabin kilahuma. I continued to be both, which means I continued to describe the virtues of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu as I saw them, and I continued to describe the virtues of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu bihubbihima, with because of their love. He loved all the Sahaba, hatta awsad firamal, until I am buried into dust. So Imam Ash-Shafi'i was very much a traditionalist. He wanted to get the evidence of every article of Islamic jurisprudence on the basis of Quran and Hadith. He believed that the basis of Sharia of Islam is the Kitabullah wa Sunnata Rasulihi. And he, وَمَا كَانَ يَعْتَقِدُ أَنَّهُ أَحَاطَ بِسُنَّةِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ عِلْمًا. This is an extremely important point. That's why I put it in Arabic over here. I want to talk more about it. He firmly believed that he had not comprehended the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of the knowledge, which means he did not know every hadith. And nobody could claim in those days that they knew every hadith. Even nowadays, there are very few people who can say that they have read every book of hadith and understood it, and that there is no hadith which escapes them. It's easier now when you have the software, the digital software, that you can search for a particular hadith with all its transmissions, or you can search for for all the ahadiths on one specific topic, like, for example, performing the wudu. But in those days where digitalization was not there, ahadiths were not yet recorded and put into specific chapters. It was not easy, and he recognized it. And some people would not recognize this. So he will tell his students. Now, the word used is fakana yausu ashabahu ala talabil hadith. And I had mentioned to you before that ashab, which can be translated as companion, was actually people who were Imam Shafi or as scholars, students, and eventually they graduated out and they became scholars in their own right. So they were called ashab, companions, rather than students forever, although they were students as well. So he will tell them to seek for more hadith, not just be content with what they had learned from Imam Shafi. And he said, وَإِنْ رَهُ صَحِيًّا يُخَالِفُ مَا يُقَرِّرُهُ فَلْيَرْفَضُ رَأْيَهُ. If they found a hadith, an authentic hadith, which went against the opinion of Imam Ash-Shafai himself, they should reject his hadith. وَيَأْخُذُ بِالْحَدِيثِ, and they should go with that hadith. So this is an extremely important thing. Now there is an incident mentioned that a person came to Imam Ash-Shafai and he said that the Prophet ﷺ said this and this. So he narrated hadith of the Prophet, and then he asked Imam Shafi, فَقَالَ لَوْ يَا أَبَا عَبْدُ اللَّهِ أَتَقُولُ بِهَذَا. Do you also say this, or do you also go with it? Imam Shafi started to shake. His face turned pale. His condition changed completely. And he said, Ayyu ardin taqillani wa ayyu samain tazulluni. What piece of land will protect me and what sky will shadow me? Iza rawita an Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa lam aqul, that you narrate to me hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and I don't go with it. How could anyone say anything different when a hadith is mentioned? And he said, Nam ala rasi wal ainin. I say, yes, on my hand, on my head, and on my eyes. So he said that if you find a hadith which is against my opinion, then فَالْقَوْلُ مَا قَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَهُوَ قَولِي. Then the statement of the Prophet ﷺ is what I say as well. And he would continue to repeat this statement. He had a complete devotion to a very high ideal. So when you seek out any profession for yourself or any line of work or any line of education, be devoted to a very high ideal. Try for excellence. Such people are never arrogant. They do seek prominence. They do not seek prominence. They do not lose temper when engaged in a dialogue. They seek nothing but the truth. Imam Shafi said that I want people to learn this knowledge and not attribute it to me so that they may be rewarded for it and not praise me. So when he would explain things to people, when he give an opinion, he will tell people that learn it, but do not attribute it to me. So that people think that you have taught them and they will be grateful to you, you will be rewarded for it, and they would not praise Imam Shafi. So whatever he was doing was not for the sake of being praised. He was not showing off. He was never arrogant. He never sought prominence. He never lost temper when engaged in a dialogue, and he said nothing but the truth. So Imam Shafi's teachers, he obtained the good that each of his teachers possessed, and he took from them what he thought should be taken, leaving aside what he thought should be rejected. And this is something important in nowadays, where some leading scholars in the United States have come under the spotlight of behaving not appropriately or not in an Islamic manner. But still, we can benefit from their knowledge and leave aside things which do not concern us. He learned from the scholars of Makkah, Medina, Yemen, and Iraq, and this enabled him to formulate a masterly blend in which all the positions met in a harmonious balance, in which those general ideas were fused together and presented to the people in splendid exposition and masterly form. Imam Abu Zahra's opinion, Muhammad Abu Zahra's opinion, he writes, I'm quoting him, in my opinion, the factors which distinguish between the two schools, and he's talking about the school of opinion, Ahlul Rai, and the school of Hadith, Ahlul Hadith or Ahlul Riwaya. So he said that the factors which distinguish between the two schools are not opinion and Hadith. And this is something very important to understand, that the scholars of opinion did not reject the Hadith, and the scholars of Hadith did not give up opinion. And not many people understand this distinction. So when you say Imam Abu Hanifa belonged to Ahlul Rai, they think Imam Abu Hanifa did not use Hadith at all. This is not right. What in fact distinguishes them is the method employed to come to a judgment, the way opinion is used, and the abundance or paucity of the fatwas of the companions, Ridwanullahi alayhim ajmain. It is confirmed that the seven fuqaha of Medina, and they were the school of Hadith, seven fuqaha of Medina, they were the teachers of Hijazi fiqh, used opinion a great deal. No, they themselves. So the Alur Riwaya, Alul Hadith, the seven leading scholars of Medina themselves used opinion as well. Whatever the case, Ash Shafai took from everyone. So this is what should be our aim as well. When we are learning knowledge, we should not restrict ourselves to only one opinion and think that this is the right opinion, everything else is wrong. We should keep our minds open. If we are not able to read all of it, if somebody gives us a different opinion, we shouldn't say, brother, you're wrong. This is absolutely wrong. No, it's just we don't know. So I'm just giving you, this is a recollection of what we have learned before, but I found this chart in the actual Arabic text of the book. It was not in the English one. So the Iraqi school, we have discussed Imam Abu Hanifa, but where does the Iraqi school or the school of opinion come from? It starts from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to his two Sahaba, Abdullah bin Masud, who was sent to Kufa by Umar radiallahu ta'ala during his caliphate, and Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala, who moved the capital of Islamic State from Mecca, from Medina to Kufa, and he spent a lot of his the last part of his life over there, and his teachings and his fatwas were there. From these two Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim ajmain, one of the two of the most knowledgeable one, the Prophet ﷺ said about Ali bin Talib radiallahu ta'ala, Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Ali Babuha. I am the city of knowledge, and Ali radiallahu ta'ala is the door of it. From them come the students who learned Qadi Sureh, Al-Qama, Masruq, Aswad, then An-Nakhai, which is Ibrahim An-Nakhai, Qadi Amir bin Sharjil, then Hamad bin Abi Sulaiman, who was the immediate teacher of Imam Abu Hanifa. So you can see the tree. Now, the Hijazi school, the school of the Alul Hadith, Alul Riwaya, starts in Medina. Umar radiallahu ta'ala, Usman radiallahu ta'ala, Abdullah bin Umar, Abdullah bin Abbas, who then moved on to Makkah as well, Zaid bin Sabit. There were, and then comes the seven leading scholars of Medina. And the names are given over here. Abdullah bin Utbah bin Masud, Urwa bin Zubair, Qasim bin Muhammad bin Abi Bakr. He was the grandson of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. Sayyid ibn al-Musayyab, he was the son-in-law of Abu Huraira radiallahu ta'ala. Sulaiman bin Yasar, Kharija bin Zaid bin Sabit, son of Zaid bin Sabit, and Salim bin Abdullah. They of Abdullah bin Umar. From them learned Ibn Shahab az-Zuhri, one of the most common narrators of hadith in Sahih of Imam Bukhari, Nafi, who was the Mawla of Abdullah bin Umar, and Nafi was one of the teachers of Imam Malik. I mentioned you the golden chain, the Silsilatul Zahab, Imam Malik, an Nafi, an Abdullah bin Umar, an Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Abu Zanat, and Rabiatul Rahi. He belonged to the Hijazi school, but he was like the grandfather of Ahlul Rai and Yahya bin Sa'id, and from them learned Imam Malik bin Anas. So Ash Shafai and the learning of the Quran. It seems like Ash Shafai took Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala as his role model in the Quranic exposition. There is no original book of tafsir that does not quote Abdullah bin Abbas 1,000 times. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu was his role model in the Quranic exposition, hadith, balagha, which is eloquence, poetry, and fiqh. Someday, inshallah, I'll give a talk on the role of poetry in Islam. His stay in Makkah exposed him to a body of knowledge not to be found in either Iraq or Medina. This is something very important to remember. A scholar is not a scholar if he has learned from only one teacher. A scholar is not a scholar if he has learned from multiple scholars in only one area of Islamic knowledge. A scholar had to travel and learn from multiple teachers in a lot of Islamic centers. So Muhammad Abuzzara mentioned وهو الأخذ بالطريقة وهو الأخذ بالطريقة ابن عباس في العناية بدراسة القرآن والعناية بمجمله ومفصله ومطلقه ومقيده وخاصه وعامه. These are certain terms related to the study of the Quran, which was the approach of Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala. That there are verses of the Quran which are mujmal, and there are verses which are mufassal. Mufassal would mean detailed verses, and mujmal are the verses which are not detailed, which are referential, which are expounded at other places. Mutlaq are verses which are not conditional, unconditional, they apply. Muqayyad, which apply with certain conditions. Khas, which are very specific to certain circumstances. Wa'am, which are generic. By studying all of this, following in the path of Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu ta'ala, Imam Shafi produced a new discipline for the scholars of his time, which they had not studied previously, even though they had all the material for it. So one of the greatness of Imam Shafi is that although the approaches to the study of Quran, fiqh, and hadith were there, the material was also there, but it was all scattered. He gathered them together, and he gathered it from three different seas: the sea or the ocean of Makkah, the ocean of Medina, the ocean of Iraq. He drank from the waters of all of these oceans, and then he prepared for us a drink that we still drink today. Then, as I said, dirasatu shakhsiya, personal studies, private studies, and ikhtibarat wa tajarib, experiences, our lifetime experiences. A scholar also learns not just from his teachers and from the books, but from his private studies, reflection, travels, and experiences. He spent time with the people who were descendants of those among whom the Quran was revealed, learning from their customs and their characters. And Abuzzara mentioned this statement, وَمِنْ عَادَاتِهِمْ مَا يُفَسِّرُ بَعْضُ مَا فِي الْقُرْآنِ, that the Quran was revealed in a particular culture as well. And by studying the culture and habits of the people, one can learn the understanding of some portions of the Quran. So, in order to get a first hand experience of that, Imam Shafi had to travel and live among those people to study the Quran. Now, Imam Shafi mentions about all of these things, his travel in his poetry. Sa'adribu fi tulil bilade wa ardiha, that I travel in the length and breadth of the lands. Analu muradi or amutu ghariba, I will either obtain my ambition or I will die a stranger. فَإِن تَلَفَتْ نَفْسِي فَلِلَّهِ دُرَّةٌ, if I die, then Allah will reward me for it. وَإِن سَلِمْتُ كَانَ الرُّجُوعُ قَرِيبًا, and if I am saved, then I will be returning soon. The benefits of traveling: broadening of mind through acquiring more material and information, increase in discernment, sharpening of senses, and provision of food for thought through new impressions, exposure to more teachers with different viewpoints and approaches. Ash Shafai was exposed to other leading scholars of its time, such as Imam al-Awza'i, Ibn Abi Layla, Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, and Nalat ibn Sa'd. Muqatil ibn Sulaiman is considered to be one of the first Mufassir of the Quran, and he was a Zaydi Shia. But Imam Shafi'i learned from him. So Imam Shafi'i uh, wanted to learn from Imam al-Layth. He had heard about him, so he wanted to travel to him. But by the time he reached, he found that Imam al-Layth had passed away. Imam al-Layth and Imam Malik, they stood on sort of opposite ends. Imam Malik had actually written a letter to Imam al-Layth that I have heard that you are giving fatwa which is against the opinion of the people of Medina. And Imam al-Layth wrote a letter to him explaining his position. That entire letter in Arabic is present in the Arabic volume of this work, and its English translation is present in the one volume, Great Lives of Imams, in the story of Imam Shafi. I don't have the time to go through the entire letter, but he came to find out that Al-Layth afqahu min Malik, that I think that Imam Al-Layth must have been a greater jurist than Imam Malik. He never met Al-Layth. He learned from his students and reached the conclusion that if the students are at that level, then what level Imam Al-Layth would be on. But he said, Illa an asabahu lam yaqumu bihi. The madhab of Imam Al-Layth, his approach, did not progress further because his students did not progress it. You know, the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa did not end when Imam Abu Hanifa died. It has continued to prosper. It has continued to uh, reshape and to metamorphose. Similarly, the madhab of Imam Malik also did not just stop at Imam Malik. The madhab of Imam Shafai, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, their students continued as they came across other newer uh, issues. They used the principle established by the founders of the madhab, but the students of Imam al-Layth did not propagate his madhab first. He also gave credit to everyone from whom he learned directly or indirectly. So he said, and which is a quotation from the Tariq ibn Kathir, it is a statement of Imam Shafai, Man arad al fiqh fahuwa ayalun ala Abi Hanifa. Whoever wants to learn fiqh, he should learn from Imam Abu Hanifa or he should depend upon Imam Abu Hanifa. The method, the methodology. وَمَنْ أَرَادَ السِّيَرَ فَهُوَ ayal ala Muhammad bin Ishaq. Whoever wants to learn the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, it is inevitable for him to learn from, not to learn from Imam Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad ibn Ishaq, who is the writer of the Sirah ibn Ishaq, which is now present only in as Sirah ibn Ishaq. وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ ayal ala Malik. Whoever wants to learn hadith, he must depend upon Imam Malik. وَمَنْ أَرَادَ التَّفْسِير فَهُوَ ayalun ala Muqatil bin Sulaiman. Whoever wants to learn to have a good grasp of tafsir, he should depend upon Muqatil bin Sulaiman. And again, Muqatil bin Sulaiman was a Zaydi Shia, but Imam Shafi learned from him. The other sciences. Now, it is mentioned that Imam Shafi even learned Greek, and there is an incident mentioned, which is mentioned by Hatim al-Razi in his Manaqib of Imam Shafi, and it pertains to the trial of Imam Shafi before Harun Rashid, Khalifa Harun Rashid, that in one of the dialogues, Harun Rashid said, فَكَيْفَ عِلْمُكَ بِالطِّبِّ. He asked Imam Shafi, what's your knowledge in the field of medicine? And Imam Shafi said that I know what the Romans have said and what people like Aristotle and Hippocrates and Jalinos and Corcurius, these were Greek and Roman philosophers and physicists, وَأَبُقْلِسْ بِاللُّغَاتِ in their languages. From this, Ar-Razi tries to derive this thing that it's possible that Imam Ashafi knew the Greek language as well. The reason he's talking about Greek is that at that time, in the Abbasid period, there was an influx of a lot of Greek books and Greek material uh, in the Arab world, but at the same time, these texts were also being translated. But he said, بِاللُّغَاتِهَا in their languages. So this could imply that Imam Shafi knew at least some Greek and Roman. وَمَا نَقِلُّهُ أَتِّبَاعُ الْعَرَبِ. And I also know what the Arab physicians have written down, and the philosopher of Hindi, the Indian philosophers, and the scholars of Persia. Did he know Hindi language? Did he know Persian language? I don't know. But it seems like Imam Shafi knew a lot more than just the Quran, Hadith, and Fiqh and the language of in the Arabic language. He seems to be well versed in other disciplines as well, including medicine and philosophy. Now, the times of Imam Shafi, this is a totally separate chapter in itself. I will summarize this. The reason is that we have discussed the influences of that period of time on Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik as well, because that period was not a period of 1 year or 1 decade. It was a period of several decades, starting from the last period of Banu Umayyah and going through 100 years or more of the Abbasid period. So Imam Ash Shafai was born and lived in the Abbasid era exclusively, during which the Islamic sciences flourished and moved from oral transmission to being recorded in writing. So a very literary, very academic period. The spread of Islam outside of Arabia and influx of Persian, Greek, Indian, and Aramean people, their cultures, languages, and ideas was an important source of knowledge as well as a source of confusion. And it's possible that Imam Shafi either met with such people and learned from them, or he read their books that translated into Arabic. Allah knows best. This was a true melting pot. There were political revolts. I will just mention briefly about the Zindiqs. Zindiqs were actually the Persians who converted to Islam, and then there was a revolt of Al Muqamma. I think it was Hashim Al Muqanna. Al Muqanna means the veiled, who it's mentioned that his face was burned, so he used to cover his face with a veil, and he also claimed to be a prophet, and he was known as the veiled prophet. He was actually fighting for the Abbasids, and then he turned against the Abbasid. He led a revolt against the Abbasid, in which the majority of the army was Persian. They were called Zindiqs, and eventually they were crushed by Al Mahdi. Then there were Abbasid caliphs who were patronizing the Mu'tazilas, Al Mansur, Al Mahdi, Al Ma'mun, Al Mu'tasim, and Al Wathiq. When we discuss Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal in detail, we will go through this in more detail. But the Persian and Greek influence led to the popularization of philosophy in the Islamic world. And just as it happened in the case of Christianity, philosophy and religion started to get mixed up. And people started to apply the principles of philosophy or the terminology of philosophy and its dogmas to religion as well. And it needed people who could answer them at an intellectual level. And those people were the Mu'tazilas, the rationalists. The government needed such people, and it patronized them to such an extent that some of the Abbasid Khulafa themselves became the rationalists. They started to patronize the Mu'tazilas, but at the same time, they started to persecute the non Mu'tazilis as well. Al Mutawakkil finally repudiated the Mu'tazila doctrine, and this group now suffered persecution. Al Mutawakkil ended the prosecution or the minha or the trial. He released Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. But however, Al Mutawakkil himself was a very tough ruler towards the non Muslim citizens. We'll discuss that inshallah in detail when we talk about Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. There were scholastic debates which sometimes became very heated, which also led to persecution of one group by another, supported by the government. There were debates between the proponents of tradition and opinion, Ahlur Hadith, Ahlur Riwaya, and Ahlur Rai. They were quite widespread. Imam Ashafi's travel to various centers of Islamic knowledge gave him a first hand experience of what was going on academically. We only read about these things. We have not lived in those times, so it is not easy for us to comprehend because we oftentimes we don't even have the first hand account that we read. As time went on, scholarly rivalry became a means to personal glory. So it's like they became two political parties, and you have to choose. You have to be a member of one or the other. Some of the caliphs encouraged such debates and took part in them as well, such as Al Mamun. They paid handsome salaries to the people who were propagate their ideas. Some of the debates were based upon sincerity of intention, be it the people of tradition, the people of opinion, or the rationalist, each one searching for the ultimate truth. So we cannot say that all rationalists were bad people, all people of opinion were bad people. There were people who were very sincere. Their approach may have been different, it was different. But we cannot question the sincerity of intention of everyone, because they were all trying to search for the ultimate truth. And it is mentioned that, for example, the debate between during the Hajj period. For example, I mentioned one between Imam Awza'i and Imam Abu Hanifa, and then the famous correspondence between Imam Malik and Imam Al-Layth. I think it may be worthwhile that when we have uh, completed Imam Shafai, we may discuss that later. I will see, inshallah. There were scholars of different fields. Hadith scholars applied themselves to distinguishing sound hadith from inauthentic ones, sahih versus daif, and they set out the rules and criteria to assess the reliability of the narrators. Jarh Tadil is called science of Jarh Tadil. They tried to make it clear which traditions could be used for evidence in the deen of Islam, and which could not. Jurists discussing not just the actual events but also the hypothetical questions. This was a speciality of the Hanafi madhab. Jurists began to formulate the methodology to be followed, the ways in which different types of evidence related to each other, the criteria for legal deduction, and the principles of derivation. So, in the initial stages, when a teacher gave a fatwa, it was accepted. But later on, the followers said, we need to find out why did our teacher or how did our teacher reach this conclusion. So, based upon those fatwas, this study of those fatwas, they were able to formulate the methodology which they could also formulate. The scholars begin debating about the position of the Sunnah in relation to the Book of Allah and what is its strength. This issue is still being done about the independent authority of Sunnah as a source of religion, as a source of Islamic Sharia. Does the Sunnah merely explain the Quran, or do its rulings actually add to the Quranic rulings? Can the Sunnah abrogate some Quranic rulings? What is abrogation? When does this happen? And how does this happen? Disagreement about the methods in dealing with these issues. The strength of linguistic expression in evidence was examined, as well as how legal texts are understood and rulings derived. All of these points can be discussed in a couple of talks, which is an extremely important talk. The last one is important. People who are not very well versed in Arabic language study the Quran, Hadiths, and Fiqh in English, and this leads to problem because a translation is only as good as the translator himself or herself. A translator can also have a bias. A translator may have also studied from a translation done by someone else, who also studied in translation done by someone else. Quran and Hadith, the words are extremely important. How a statement is framed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ flows, what words are chosen related to particular context is extremely important in deriving the rules of fiqh. The Imam Ash Shafai lived in the midst of that great scholarly turmoil. He was involved in debates, and the Islamic scholarship benefited from his natural gifts and his profound studies. I was discussing with one of my friends recently that sometimes we get a book and we finish it over a weekend. A book of 150 pages, 200 pages, 250 pages. The writer may have spent his entire life writing that book. And I have such books where a person claims, I'm just giving one example, that he spent 40 years studying the poet Iqbal. And after studying him for 40 years from different sources, he wrote one small book. What a privilege, what an honor it is to read the 40 years of hard work of a scholar. Should we not pay respect to our scholars, even if we disagree with them? So I want to end this with another piece of poetry. This is also about travel. That ma fil maqameli zi aqlin wa zi adabin min rahatin fadail autana wa iqtaraba. That in the stature and the station of a person of intellect and adab. Adab doesn't simply mean literature, it also means respect. A person who has been given the quality of intellect and respect and culture and education, what kind of pleasure he finds. So give up your lands, which means travel, become a stranger. Then you really find some comfort, some delight in your travel. Safir, travel. Tajid evadan amman tufariquhu. You will find the in exchange of what you are leaving behind something, something that could be even better. وَإِن سَفَ إِنَّ لَذِيذَ الْعَيْشِ فِي النَّسَبِ. And experience the fatigue, bear the fatigue, the trouble of traveling, because the delight that you will find, that you will get, is actually comes from getting tired in search of knowledge. Travel is not easy. There is hardship. I will translate nasab as hardship. That be prepared for the hardship that you will face, because it is in this hardship that the pleasure of living is to be found. Inni raitu wukuf al-ma yufsiduhu. I have seen many times that if the water is stagnant, it becomes bad, it becomes dirty. So if a human being also does not travel and he remains in one place only, he will become stagnant. His intellect will become stagnant. In Sahataba, if the water flows, it remains pure. وَإِن لَمْ يَجْرِ لَمْ يَتِبِ. If it doesn't move, it loses its purity. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولذكر الله أكبر. الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.